This is Euronews Tonight. Here are your top stories. No let-up in the battle for Severodonetsk as street fighting rages on in the eastern Ukrainian city. Russian forces use heavy artillery to try and break through Ukrainian lines. Going up for the first time in 11 years, the European Central Bank announces it is raising interest rates faced with high inflation.
The US House approves a new bill on gun control that is unlikely to pass the Senate. Here in The Cube, we take a look at the online misinformation spreading amid the debate.
And Paris's police chief apologises for tear-gassing Liverpool fans and admits there was no scientific virtue to the claim that 40,000 supporters were without the correct tickets. I'm Helena Humphrey. It is good to have you with us. There is no let-up tonight in the fight for the key city of Severodonetsk in the east of Ukraine. If captured, Moscow would gain full control of the entire Luhansk region. Now, the regional governor says that Ukrainian troops are now battling for every house and every street and coming under constant Russian bombardment, forcing them out to the city's limits. And that leaves some 10,000 civilians trapped in the middle of fighting. But the governor claims that the city will be liberated in a matter of days if they receive long-range weapons. Well, Ukraine's President Zelensky has demanded that Russia be removed from the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization. Now, addressing the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development conference in France, the president also condemned the invading forces for blocking food exports.
Russia needs to be accountable for provoking a new migration wave, for holding the population of Africa and Asia hostage. We need to use long-term, severe sanctions at a global level. There must be no discussion about Russia's membership at the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization. Russia could put between 400 million to 1 billion people at risk of starvation.
And we can cross now over to our international correspondent Annalise Borges in Paris, who's been tracking that address from President Zelensky at the OECD. Good to see you, Annalise. We heard today from Zelensky calling for Russia to be kicked out of the Food and Agricultural Organization. He called for more sanctions. But as this war goes on, as it continues, what more can Europe do?
Well, according to Volodymyr Zelensky, quite a lot. He has been asking for more help, more financial support, more military support as well. So more sanctions, more weapons and unequivocal support. He has been saying that Ukraine is waging a war on behalf of the entire free world. He has asked also citizens of the world not to forget that there is a war in his country, a war that is ravaging parts of Ukraine and claiming the lives of some 100 Ukrainian soldiers every day in the east, according to the defense minister of that country in a statement he made this week. The president today has been asking for Russia to be expelled from the UN Agriculture Organization, saying that that very organization was created to secure stability in the food market across the world. And that is precisely the opposite of what Russia is doing. He accuses Moscow of triggering a global grain crisis with the invasion of his country. Ukrainian ports were responsible for exporting millions of tons of grains before the war, before Russia's invasion. And authorities there say that 75 million tons of grains could be stuck in Ukraine if the blockade of those ports is not lifted by this fall. The Ukrainian authorities have been asking for security guarantees that they can resume their exports. And this week, the Russian Foreign Affairs Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Moscow was ready to grant safe passage for Ukrainian ships carrying grains, carrying corn and wheat out of those ports. But Ukraine has repeatedly said it wants Western guarantees that their ports are not going to be attacked. Helena?
Well, Annalise, that's the latest then on the diplomatic front. What we're now seeing on the ground, the news that we're receiving, that 2 British men, as well as a Moroccan national, were captured fighting in Ukraine, and now they've been sentenced to death in a trial that took place in Russian-controlled eastern Ukraine. Annalise, tell us more about the circumstances of this trial. It's not a trial that's being internationally recognised. It's widely being described as a show trial. And talk to us about the precedent that this now sets.
Oh, it's a very worrying situation indeed for Western authorities. This is the first time we hear of such a trial, as you said, organized in an unrecognized court by Russian-backed separatists in the east. They held this trial in a matter of days, and that is where British nationals Aden Aslin and Sean Pinner and a Moroccan citizen, Sadoun Brahim, were sentenced to death by firing squad. Both Aslin and Pinner say they were legitimately serving the Ukrainian military and deserve the protections granted to prisoners of war. Aslin actually holds a Ukrainian passport, and there are pictures circulating online depicting him taking an oath and joining Ukraine's 36th Naval Brigade unit. This is, as I said, the first time we hear of such a trial, of such an organized trial, and the leader of the self-declared Donetsk People's Republic, Denis Pushilin, has accused the 3 men of, quote, monstrous crimes. This is much more significant, of course, because of the fact that these were 3 foreign nationals, and the relations between Russia and the UK are already at a historic low. Things are likely to get more complicated now. A spokesperson for the British Prime Minister has said that authorities there are obviously gravely concerned and stated that they believe prisoners of war should not be exploited for political reasons. Well, the head of diplomacy, Liz Truss, announced a simulacrum of judgment without any legitimacy. The question, of course, now, Helen, is what can these authorities do? What is going to be the next step here? These 3 men, the 3 prisoners, the 2 British citizens and the Moroccan national, have 1 month to appeal.
All right, our international correspondent there, Annalise Borges. Good to talk to you, Annalise. Thank you for that. Well, as households across Europe struggle with the cost of living crisis, the European Central Bank has announced that it will increase interest rates in July. The ECB's Governing Council says that rates will be raised by 0.25%. That's across the 19-member currency bloc. And it'll be the first rate hike for the central bank in 11 years, and it'll be followed by another jump in September, potentially. Well, the ECB called inflation a major challenge, with the latest Eurozone figures showing annual inflation running at 8.1%. Well, to find out how this rate rise will impact our bank balances here in the Eurozone, I'm joined now by John Ferguson, who's the head of globalisation at Economist Impact. Good evening to you, John. Thanks for joining us. Good news, I guess, if you're saving, maybe less good news if you're looking for a loan. So talk to us about the impact of this decision today.
Yes, absolutely. As you say, good for savers, but not so much for borrowers. So that's people with credit cards, households with mortgages, businesses with business loans. But let's not forget, that is going to add to the challenges for households and businesses. As you mentioned, the cost of living crisis is really quite severe. Inflation is running above 8%, and interest rate hikes are only going to add to the challenges for households and businesses. But the ECB has to do this. You mentioned the inflation rate of being above 8%, and what they're worried about is inflation becoming entrenched at that level. So the ECB has to move. They have to make these moves now with interest rates, but it is going to add more pressure to those household budgets and make a more challenging environment for businesses as well.
Right, so, the average consumer might not like this decision very much in principle, but as you mentioned, taking a look at the rates of inflation, they're also worrying. So do you think this current move from the ECB will be enough to cool things down?
No, and I think we should all be prepared for a number of rate hikes. There'll probably be another one this year, maybe in September, and then also a few more next year as well. So ECB rates could go anywhere between 1.5 and 2%. So they just need to do more than just one. One's not going to be enough. Inflation is stubbornly high. It's been impacted by the things like supply chain issues that we've been discussing for a couple of years, the war in Ukraine, as you just discussed, impacting food and energy prices. The ECB can't influence all of those things, but they need to slow down some spending. There's going to be more than this interest rate increase coming up, because they're going to need to do a fair bit more over the next 12 months to slow down inflation.
And the other thing, John, the situation we're looking at is also when it comes to growth. I mean, the ECB's also downgraded its growth forecasts in light of all those factors that you just mentioned there, including the war in Ukraine. But I'm just wondering, across the Eurozone, how sluggish do you think things will be?
This is the key question and the key challenge. Absolutely, this is the biggest difficulty facing the ECB. Even before these interest rate increases, and I said there's as I mentioned, there's likely to be a few, the risk of recession in Europe is already high. So the ECB has the challenge. It is necessary to increase interest rates, but it wants to do so in a way that doesn't tip the region into recession. It's going to be extremely, extremely difficult to do that because of so many vulnerabilities in the European economy right now, having built up over the last couple of years and from the war in Ukraine. So the ECB has a very, very, very fine line to walk, and it's going to be a really difficult challenge not to tip the region into recession.
All right, John Ferguson, Head of Globalisation at Economist Impact. Good to have you on. Thanks a lot. So Algeria has suspended a decades-long friendship treaty with Spain, and that is amid fallout over its position on the Western Sahara. Now, Spain has upheld a long-standing policy of neutrality over the disputed North African region, but in March, Madrid announced its support for Morocco's autonomy plan for the territory. Algeria's decision reflects the worsening of relations with Rabat following the break-off of diplomatic ties last year. Well, for more on this, let's go over now to our reporter in Madrid, Jaime Velasquez. Good to see you. The cooperation treaty, as you know, between Algeria and Spain, it goes back 20 years. Now Algeria has announced that it's suspending it. Talk us through the main issues here.
Yeah, indeed, Spain and Algeria had been building a very good relation, especially in these last 2 decades. The problem now with the end of this friendship agreement is that it is effectively freezing and halting trade between Algeria and Spain worth around 3,000 million euros per year. And this is very worrying for Spain, obviously, and for the businesses in this context that we are living at the moment. But Spain is now actually considering to bring the matter to Brussels because Algeria might be violating a broader agreement with the European Union. Not trading with Spain might be a dishonor of the agreements that Algeria have with the whole European Union. And this is why the European Commission has already backed Spain and asked Algeria to reconsider its position towards Spain in this matter.
Well, you just mentioned trade there, but what else could be at stake here looking further down the line?
Yeah, well, it depends how farther Algeria will go. What Spain and the Foreign Affairs Ministry has confirmed is that the gas supply for now is safe. It's not under this new set of rules or this friendship agreement. So at least the gas coming from Algeria to Spain and Europe for now will keep flowing. This is very important because Algeria is one of the main natural gas suppliers to Spain and to Europe, obviously, as well. But Spain is especially worried about more intangible parts of a friendship relation, which is probably what is going to happen, for example, if Algeria starts to relax controls regarding migration. Are we going to see more migrants, illegal migrants, departing the coast of Algeria in the way to Europe? Or what is going to happen, for example, with cooperation with regarding intelligence? Algeria has been a very trustworthy partner regarding jihadist terrorism, and it's been helping the European authorities and the Spanish authorities a lot in this question. So I think that this is probably at this moment the most worrying facts. We will see how this play out. The European Commission said, well, let's try to solve this via conversations and dialogue, and we'll see if they find a common ground in the next weeks.
Well, nevertheless, as you say, some key questions there. Jaime Velasquez in Madrid breaking that all down for us. Thank you. Good to catch up. Well, the US House of Representatives has approved a new wide-ranging bill aimed at gun control after recent mass shootings in Buffalo, New York and Uvalde, Texas. But opposition in the Senate means it is highly unlikely to come into law. And amid the debate, misinformation about gun control has spread online. Our team in the Cube has more.
Well, Helena, these new measures include, in the United States, banning the sale of semi-automatic weapons to anyone under the age of 21, as well as banning the sale of high-capacity magazines. This move, as you say, comes just 2 weeks after a gunman killed 19 young students and 2 teachers at a school in Uvalde, Texas. And according to the US Department for Homeland Security, since 1970, there have now been 2,064 shooting incidents at schools in the country. Now, the law that has been passed by the House today is unlikely to come into effect because, as you say, the US Senate needs to approve it, and there is a very strong Republican opposition there. And amid this very emotional debate, online we're seeing misinformation about strict gun control concerning both the United States and other countries around the world. I want to bring in my colleague Sofia Hatzinkova, who's been taking a look at one false claim related to Israel.
Yes, so these sorts of posts have been circulating all over social media these past few days. They claim that Israel has never seen a school shooting because teenagers can carry guns to school. Now, Matt, compared to the over 2,000 shootings that we've seen in the U.S. since the 1970s, Israel has only seen about half a dozen of those in the same time period. So stating that Israel has never had a school shooting isn't exactly true. The second claim that we fact-checked is gun ownership in Israel. You might be surprised to know that only 2% of the population owns guns. And this is because of the strict preconditions for owning a personal firearm. As you can see, so you must be over 27 to own a firearm, or you must have served in the military. You must also complete a mental health check with a doctor, and you must prove that your profession requires you to own your own private gun. And Matt, the acceptance rate is only about 65%, according to the Israeli Defense Ministry.
And Sophia, going back to that photo that we saw being shared alongside the false claim, we also know that's not a recent image as well.
Yeah, exactly. After doing a reverse image search, we found that this photo has been published many times since 2014. And in a blog post in 2021, it stated that these women are actually part of the IDF. Those are the Israeli Defense Forces, and they're allowed to carry a gun in and out of uniform. But this certainly does not prove that teenagers are carrying assault weapons into Israeli schools. But the important question is, does carrying guns means that there is less violence in general? We asked this question to Ian Overton from Action for Art Violence.
The notion that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun has been debunked repeatedly. Well, when you look at the data of mass shootings in America, less than 2% were responded to by an armed citizen. So it's a real rarity that actually armed citizens end up shooting mass shooters. So I would say on so many levels, that claim just doesn't face up to hard facts and evidence.
That was Ian Overton speaking to my colleague Sofia Hatzinkova. So Helena, as you can see, it's a very emotional debate about gun control that has generated online misinformation. Opponents to these new laws in the US say they are an infringement of their constitutional right to carry a firearm. And the Democrats are going to need at least 10 Republican senators to swing in their favour if this new law on gun control is going to come into effect.
All right, Matthew and Sophia there, thank you both so much, setting the record straight. Important work. Thanks, guys. The head of the Paris police force has apologised for the use of tear gas against Liverpool fans at the Champions League final in the French capital. Officers tear-gassed and pepper-sprayed fans, including children, as they crowded around entry points to the ground ahead of the game last month. Speaking at a French Senate hearing, the police chief officer offered his sincere regrets for the chaos outside of the Stade de France, but said he believed that tear gas was the only way to control the crowd. Now, he also said that there was, quote, no scientific virtue in his earlier claim that as many as 40,000 Liverpool fans had arrived at the stadium with fake or incorrect tickets. Golf's PGA Tour has suspended all current and future players who take part in events on the Saudi-backed Live Series. In a statement, the PGA Tour's commissioner confirmed that it had revoked the membership of players such as former world number one Dustin Johnson and six-time major winner Phil Mickelson. Well, the announcement comes as the first Live event is in full swing at the Centurion Club in St Albans. Fire crews in Spain are in a race against time to contain wildfires, with the country potentially on the verge of a heat wave. Now, around 2,000 people have been evacuated from villages and towns in the Malaga region as emergency services combat the blaze. Authorities hope to have the fires under control, they say, before the weekend, when temperatures are expected to top 30 degrees Celsius.